Ever feel like diplomacy just creates more tension than it resolves? It's a tricky balancing act that often leaves countries feeling more divided than united. When we think of diplomacy, we often think of charismatic leaders, fancy embassies, and high-stakes negotiations. But diplomacy is more than just fancy words and fancy buildings. It's the art of navigating complex relationships between nations, each with their own interests, values, and priorities. And in today's geopolitical landscape, diplomacy has become more crucial than ever. With the rise of globalization, international relations have become increasingly intertwined. A single misstep can have far-reaching consequences that affect not just two nations, but the entire world. As we explore the world of diplomacy, we'll examine both its potential to unite nations and its propensity to drive them further apart. We'll delve into the history of diplomacy, analyze recent examples of diplomatic efforts, and discuss the outcomes of these endeavors. Traditional diplomacy has its roots in ancient Greece and Rome, where ambassadors would engage in face-to-face negotiations to resolve conflicts and forge alliances. Over time, diplomacy evolved to include a range of strategies, from secret back-channel communications to elaborate international summits. In the modern era, diplomacy has expanded to involve multiple stakeholders, from NGOs and multinational corporations to social media influencers and individual citizens. This shift has opened up new avenues for dialogue and cooperation, but it also introduces new challenges and complexities. One recent example of diplomatic efforts is the Paris Climate Agreement. In 2015, nearly 200 countries came together to commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigating the effects of climate change. This agreement marked a major milestone in international cooperation, demonstrating that diplomacy can indeed unite nations around a shared goal. Another example is the Iran nuclear deal, which saw the United States, the European Union, and other world powers negotiating with Iran to limit its nuclear program in exchange for economic sanctions relief. This deal showed that diplomacy can be an effective tool in preventing conflict and promoting stability. However, not all diplomatic efforts have been successful. The ongoing stalemate between North and South Korea, for instance, demonstrates the limits of diplomacy in the face of deeply entrenched interests and ideologies. Moreover, diplomatic efforts can sometimes have unintended consequences. Take the example of the Camp David Accords, brokered by Jimmy Carter in 1978. While the Accords did bring peace between Israel and Egypt, they also created a power vacuum that ultimately contributed to the rise of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. When analyzing the outcomes of diplomatic efforts, we must consider factors such as national interests, public opinion, and international law. We must also acknowledge the role of power dynamics, where stronger nations often wield more influence over weaker ones. As former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger once said, "Diplomacy is the art of restraining power." This quote highlights the delicate balancing act that diplomats must perform, where they must navigate the competing interests of different nations while also promoting cooperation and understanding. Another expert, Joseph Nye, has argued that soft power, the ability to attract and persuade others through cultural appeal, economic influence, and diplomacy, is often more effective than military might. This perspective emphasizes the importance of building relationships and fostering trust in international relations. In the words of Nelson Mandela, a good leader can engage in a debate frankly and thoroughly, knowing that at the end he will have to compromise. This quote underscores the importance of flexibility and compromise in diplomatic negotiations, where finding common ground is often the key to success. As we reflect on the role of diplomacy in international relations, we're left with a pressing question: does diplomacy truly unite or divide nations? The answer, of course, is complex and multifaceted. In conclusion, diplomacy is a valuable tool that can be used to promote cooperation, understanding, and peace. However, it's also a delicate balancing act that requires careful consideration of competing interests and priorities. As we move forward in an increasingly interconnected world, the importance of effective diplomacy cannot be overstated. What do you think? Do you believe diplomacy is an effective tool in international relations, or does it often create more problems than it solves? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our next video on international relations.